In 2016, my friend Tom was climbing Mount Everest when he came across a dead body on the mountain. And that alone isn't unheard of, but when I learned whose body this was and what led to their death, it left me floored. I quickly realized that this is one of the most controversial climbs and deaths in Everest history, and strangely enough, even inside tight-knit Everest circles, people don't talk about it. It's almost like they don't want it remembered. I can't say for certain why this story was buried, but I have a feeling it's because of the cruel, almost ironic way that it ended. Once you hear that, I think you're gonna understand why so few people ever bring it up. Long before she reached the death zone of Everest, Maria Stridham was teaching finance in Melbourne, Australia. Born in South Africa, she was a brilliant lecturer, sharp with numbers, and constantly challenging her students to think critically and logically, right? But the classroom was only half of her life. Outside of it, Maria was an avid outdoors woman. She didn't take ordinary vacations or quiet weekends. She chased adventure. On every climb, she naturally became the leader, often moving faster than mountaineers with twice her level of experience. Which is why, when she met Robert Grapple, who was an Australian veterinarian who shared the same hunger for exploration and skills as a climber, she knew that she'd found her soulmate. I'm telling you guys, these two together were an absolute power couple, right? They traveled the world, hiking, skiing, climbing, doing everything together. And as they did this, they fell deeper and deeper in love, which might sound like a familiar story to you, but their love was actually quite unique. And I say that because it never really felt like satisfied. Let me explain. There was always another mountain that they hadn't conquered together, leading them to want more and more. And this desire ultimately led them to the 7 Summits Challenge, which is when climbers take on the highest mountain on every continent. And of course, at the top of that list looms Mount Everest. Now, Maria and Robert had another unique thing going for them, because even though they had all of these big plans to do giant, difficult adventures together, there was one thing that they wouldn't do together, or I guess consume together. Maria and Robert were both devout vegans, and not in the casual sense either, where, maybe they'd have a bite of someone else's burger or cave for a slice of cheese every now and again. No, veganism guided every part of their lives. Their commitment to the diet was basically as strong as their bond to each other, and they wanted to prove that vegans could do anything, including climbing the 7 summits. Now, I need to put a massive disclaimer here. I am not a vegan, and I'm definitely not an expert in nutrition or biology or anything like that. And so in no way am I going to say that being a vegan makes you a worse or better climber. And for the most part, I know that most vegans or people with, more intense, we're going to say diets, I know that these people know what's going on in their body pretty well. And so I can't reiterate enough to you here. Please don't take this story as an attack on veganism. People of all different diets are welcome to watch my videos and are welcome in my comment section. All I'm saying is that for this particular story, I think it's important to note that the diet aspect of Maria and Robert's life has largely been the center of public discussion, and so we kind of have to talk about it. So Maria and Robert's friends did sometimes question their diets. Some doctors anyways, would warn about the diet's effect on vital nutrients like protein, iron, and B12. And some mountaineers even argued that at extreme altitudes, vegan diets can leave climbers weak and vulnerable. But Maria insisted that their choices didn't limit what they could do. And to be fair, she was backed up by plenty of other doctors and experts and mountaineers who agree with her. I mean, vegans should be able to do just about everything that non-vegans can do, right? Besides, eating meat and animal products. Did that really need to be said? As long as you're taking care of your body, and as long as you know what's happening to your body in the most extreme environments on Earth, you should be okay. But the key word there is should. This belief in themselves and in their vegan diet carried Maria and Robert across the world, from Kilimanjaro to Denali to Aconcagua. But Mount Everest? Well, Everest is a different kind of challenge. one that requires all the preparation and all the commitment and honestly, all of the nutrients that you can get. It's also a challenge that, get this, no vegan had ever accomplished before. And so for Maria and Robert, they weren't just determined to climb Mount Everest and complete the 7 summits. They were determined to break this record, to be the first vegans to ever summit the highest mountain in the world. And while this goal was frankly very inspiring, I hope we can all agree on that, it was also a very dangerous gamble. At the time, the summit rate on Mount Everest was just over 50%, meaning that barely 1 out of every 2 climbers actually made it to the top, which also meant the other half failed, often in brutal, unforgiving ways. For Maria and Robert, chasing history together meant stepping into a climb where the odds were already stacked against them, and the mountain rarely shows mercy to those who fall on the wrong side of that coin. Folks, things are about to get, I'm just gonna say it, f***ed up. Excuse my language there, but it's honestly the best way to say it. I don't know how else to say it. And so before we get to this effed up stuff, allow me to lighten the mood for just a second. I think we could all use a smile before the next part of this story. Allow me to tell you about Drink Element. Drink Element is the sponsor of this video, and if you've skipped my Element rambles before this, do not skip this one, because at the link at the top of the description, I have an amazing deal for you, but let me tell you why you should care first. You should care if, number 1, you sweat, which is all of you. So I don't want to see any comments that say I don't sweat, because it's not true. When you sweat, especially when you sweat a lot, you need to replace your electrolytes, and that's where Element comes in. If you don't replace those electrolytes, you're gonna get muscle cramps, you're gonna get fatigued, you're just not gonna feel very good. And Element is the best way to do this because their flavors taste amazing. Citrus salt, have you guys tried this? Once again, if you haven't, you're gonna get a great opportunity to down below, but citrus salt is probably my favorite flavor, but I always go back and forth. Lemonade salt is amazing as well. And so when you click that link at the top of the description and you place an order, I recommend citrus salt once again, you're gonna get a sample pack of 8 additional Element sticks thrown in with your order for no extra cost. It's like a variety of their most popular flavors. One more time, click that link, go buy some citrus salt or whatever flavor sounds good, and you're gonna get that sample pack with your order. Okay, that's enough fun. Things are about to get bad. Are you ready? We're gonna flash forward in time to May of 2016. And at this time, it's important to note that Everest was not just as dangerous as it normally was, it was even more so. I'm sure we've all seen photos that illustrate this, but like, Everest was just kind of overcrowded at the time with frankly way too many commercial climbs planned for this season. There was also some very unpredictable weather and lingering threats from recent avalanches and ice falls. But despite these dangers, Maria and Robert were not deterred. When they landed in Kathmandu, they began their preparations for the altitude to come by, drinking as much water as they possibly could, eating as many carbs as possible, and I'm sure they were also getting some meatless protein in there as well, because, a boost of that never hurts before a big climb. They took the short flight from Kathmandu to Lukla, and with snacks and only the usual lightheadedness that comes with elevation, Maria and Robert began their trek to base camp. Not a lot of people understand this about Everest, but by the time you get to Lukla, which is like the small town where you start your journey to base camp, you're already over 9,000 feet above sea level, or over 2,800 meters. And it's not like you get to base camp in just one simple short hike, or even in one day. It's a multi-day brutal journey just to get there. My friend Tom, who also happens to be another YouTuber, by the way, he helped me out a lot with this script. You should check out his channel. It's called Everest Mystery. Tom told me that on those days where you're climbing to base camp, you really have to be just careful because the wind can get taken out of you from pushing even just a little bit too much, which is insane. But anyways, Robert and Maria eventually did arrive at base camp, which is over 17,000 feet above sea level, or over 500 meters, which really should put in perspective how difficult just the climb to get to base camp is, right? And I'm sure by the time they got there, Robert and Maria were probably a little bit gassed, but that's pretty par for the course for everyone, right? In fact, Robert and Maria actually had spent a lot of time at this very same altitude on their previous climbs. And so they knew not only how to take care of themselves, but also how to take care of each other. And that love and caretaking, along with the sheer will it takes to accomplish this feat, was what was going to get them up the next 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters to the summit of the highest mountain on Earth together. But right here, it's important to note that when you climb Everest, everyone kind of knows the deal. I mean, I already told you that it's close to a 50-50 shot to actually reach the summit, but there's also another statistic that I need to share. There's a risk, a very real risk, that when you go up the mountain, you may not come back down. As of 2025, in the best research that I could find, the number of people that don't come back down is a little bit more than 1%, which might sound small, but you need to know that Everest guides and Sherpas take that percentage very seriously because it does happen from time to time. And the reason I bring this up is because going with someone who loves you more than the world might feel like an added security at first, but that may make what could possibly happen to you up there or your partner so much worse, right? And so flash forward to May 20th, 2016. Maria and Robert had made it all the way up to Camp 4, perched at over 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters. Ahead of them was just the final push to the summit. I mean, they were really close. It was early in the morning and the conditions weren't ideal, but there was enough of a window for them to make that push to summit Mount Everest. Darkness surrounded them. Maria's and Robert's headlamps cut through the snow and ice. Folks, at this elevation, I've never been there, but from talking to Tom and everyone knows that every single step hurts. Every single breath feels like it's gonna be your last. It's a straight up battle to move forward, but you also can't push yourself too hard either. And so you're in this struggle, and all of that combines while the wind is just whipping in your face. Oh, and in Maria and Robert's case, they haven't even been able to eat any beef jerky. But anyways, Maria was actually starting off unusually strong. She was actually leading Robert and moving faster than the rest of the climbers in their group. And again, I mentioned it earlier, but she had this record, this big record in her mind, this idea of being the very first vegan to ever summit Mount Everest. And I'm gonna make some assumptions here, but while I imagine it would feel really good just for herself to break a record, we all, winning something or breaking a record feels good, but I think it was probably even more important to her to break this record because it would just be so validating to the lifestyle that her and Robert had committed to. She could prove all the haters of the vegan diet or even a lot of the doctors and experts wrong. That you could do something like this while eating no meat or animal products. And so she's charging up the mountain, and Robert was just a little bit behind her, but with her every step of the way. In fact, he was actually going to let her be the first one to summit because he knew that this record mattered more to her than to him. But as the hours dragged on and the summit became closer and closer, something started to change. Robert was actually the first one to notice, even before the Sherpas and the guides. Maria's pace, which had started out so strong, began to slow down. And at first, Robert didn't say anything, probably because at that altitude, you're just trying to focus on your own breathing and getting up the next step. And so, at first it's whatever, but after a few minutes, Maria's pace became noticeable to the rest of the group. Her breath became shallow and rapid. Her chest rattled with each, inhale, and her body just seemed to start giving out on her, as if she had basically run out of fuel. She whispered, barely audible through her mask, but just enough for her husband to hear, quote, "I don't feel right." And that's probably a line that we've all said before, but you need to remember that at altitude, up in the death zone of Mount Everest, hearing those words is terrifying. That is almost the worst case scenario for a climber in this situation. And it also brings up a lot of hard decisions. And in this moment, Maria and Robert decided to keep pushing on silently as Maria tried to basically mask her suffering. But it wasn't long until her skin started to turn completely pale and her lips became fully blue. Each breath that she took came with this wet, gurgling sound, which was absolutely horrifying. It's hard to even say that, to be honest. The Sherpas were taking note of her condition, but Maria was still trucking on. Her eyes stayed straight ahead of her, but behind her mask, The truth was that they were glassy and unfocused. I mean, it was getting bad. But even still, she could actually see the final pass leading to the summit at this point. She even paused to kind of marvel at it, right? She was so close. And just as she took a confident step towards it, disaster struck, folks. Her knees gave way and she buckled into the snow. And at that moment, Maria's body was suffering severely from several things, as she was lacking blood flow, warmth, and possibly some key nutrients that would have helped her stay upright. But most notably, Maria was lacking oxygen. Again, where she is, the air is so thin, she's at high altitude in the death zone of Mount Everest. She was experiencing the symptoms of something called HAPE, which is high altitude pulmonary edema. This is when fluids fill your lungs, restricting oxygen flow. And when you're that high up in elevation with the air so thin anyways, basically anything else that gets in the way of your breathing puts you in very, very bad shape very, very quickly. And so after she fell, Robert grabbed Maria and he pulled her out of the snow. He supported her weight and tried to keep her upright, because the floor of the mountain was freezing, and adding hypothermia to the mix of this already bad situation was obviously not what needed to happen. Things started to get a little chaotic here. Sherpas were kind of shouting instructions to each other, opening oxygen bottles and just passing them to Maria. As the concerned caretakers kind of stood there, trying to do anything they could for her, the sun started to pass over them, meaning that it was now afternoon. Their window to climb Everest was closing. Time stretched and distorted all around them. Every second felt like an hour. And again, every breath was agony. They tried to push further altogether, but Maria was basically grasping for air at this point, and so once again, they had to stop. And here's one of the hardest parts of all of this. Right at the spot where Maria was now bent over, grasping for air, she could actually make out a vision. Now, of course, this could have been a hallucination, and at first, maybe Maria thought it was one, but soon, the Sherpas saw it too, and eventually, Robert's attention was brought upwards as well. All of them saw the clouds parted in just the right way, at just the right moment, that the peak of Everest seemed to be right within reach. I mean, this was beautiful, and it was right there. Robert and Maria basically had the same thoughts, but neither of them could speak it in this moment. For Robert, the choices and options became agonizingly clear. He could climb up to the summit, leaving Maria with the Sherpas to survive however she could. He could stay with Maria, potentially risking both of their lives, or they could all turn back now. Now, in hindsight, Maria, the professor, would have known that turning back was the only logical choice and certainly the safest. And maybe if she was thinking more clearly, she would have turned back even earlier in the climb. There's probably some of you that have been thinking this for a while now as I've told this story, but I want you to put yourself in their shoes for a second. This was their ultimate dream. These climbs were something that they did together. It meant so much to them, not just in terms of pride, but in terms of who they were, right? It was what their love was defined by, which is why it isn't entirely shocking that it wasn't Robert that actually made the final decision here. It was Maria herself. Robert and Maria both felt that Robert could make it to the summit quickly and then return back to her. Maria said that she would be okay to wait for him to return, and Maria basically demanded that her husband go to the summit and leave her behind in this moment. She really did not want to let her difficulties get in the way of her husband's dream and get in the way of breaking this record. She would wait right there on the mountain, and they would celebrate Robert's summiting of Everest together once he returned. Take a second to let that sink in, folks. For Maria, this is her letting go of her dream of being the first vegan atop the mountain, and then encouraging her husband to summit without her and choosing to wait for him to come down instead of returning immediately to camp, which was obviously the safest thing to do. And again, it's easy to kind of hyper-analyze these things after the fact, but I don't know if this decision that Maria made was made out of selflessness or out of just straight up exhaustion. But anyways, I now want you to put yourself in Robert's shoes. I mean, at this point, the last thing he's thinking about is his own life, right? He's asking himself a million questions like, is my wife gonna be okay? Like, what should I do? Do I stay with her? Do I listen to her and go? Am I helping even just being here, or am I in the way? Should I just say screw it and climb to the top? I mean, it's so close, it's right there. And every answer to any of these questions just felt like betrayal. But when he heard the words of Maria, the love of his life, reassuring him that it's okay to go up without her, that she'd be fine, honestly, in that scenario, I think that most of us would have done what Robert and Maria ended up doing, even if in hindsight it may not have been the most rational move. Because as much as this was Maria's dream, again, it was Robert's too. And so Robert, just like he had done on countless other adventures where Maria was at the head of the pack, followed his wife's instructions, and he left her behind. That's right, Robert left Maria with a few Sherpas who were working to stabilize her, and he began the final push up towards Everest. Now, this is unofficial, this is me editorializing a little bit, but my guess is that this might have been the fastest push up this last little section of Everest in history, right? Because you can imagine that every single step Robert took up the mountain from this point on, he was thinking about slingshotting right back down to get to his wife. And after what must have felt like hours, but in reality was probably under an hour, Robert did summit Everest. He accomplished that goal. He broke that record. At least he thought he did. But of course, this wasn't like an amazing time for him up there. It probably wasn't as triumphant as it usually is for people who summit. I think he literally went to the top, stood there for a moment, and then went immediately back down to get to his wife. And when he did return to Maria to tell her the good news, well, she didn't have any good news to report herself. At this point, Maria was just not okay at all. She had actually collapsed in the snow. There was no standing her back up, as the Sherpas who tried to do this had their ropes torn in the process. Folks, this is where that thing I was saying about having the ones you love up there with you might not be such a great thing. Because now, Robert, who had just arguably done the most incredible thing of his entire life, summiting Everest, well, he was now holding his wife while she was slowly dying. Her chest was still rattling with each desperate breath. Robert whispered words of encouragement, trying to keep Maria conscious. He applied oxygen and he monitored every beat of her pulse, but her breath became wetter and wetter. In fact, both of them began to develop frostbite as the evening temperatures set in. Maria's hallucinations took her in and out of consciousness, as Robert's sweat began to freeze all around his body. The Sherpas were now worried about not only losing one climber, Maria, but multiple climbers, including Robert. Robert was starting to breathe heavily as he sat there with Maria, panicking and begging for her to hold on to life. The sun started to crest over the mountain. It was going to be dark soon, and spending even a few minutes on the mountainside at night was agonizing. And on top of all of that, Sherpas didn't have any more oxygen cans to give out. They had given all of their resources to Maria. And so if they stayed up there any longer, they were all going to be in trouble, right? But just as the Sherpas thought about pulling Robert away from Maria, which would have been, brutal, one final painful breath rattled through the mountain. And then silence. Laying there in her husband's arms, Maria passed away. She was gone. As was her dream of summiting Everest, obviously. Robert took several minutes to be there with Maria's body. Despite the sky getting darker and darker, he was in total shock, kind of just holding on to Maria's body as tightly as he could. Can you imagine this? Like, this is hard to even say, to be honest. Like, I'm thinking of my girlfriend, Instead of the couple celebrating the fact that one of them had made it to the peak of Mount Everest, let alone two of them, an incredible achievement, just 30 minutes after he summited, Robert was now holding the lifeless body of his beloved wife. Immediately, Robert was hit with a wave of regret of these what ifs, right? But of course, none of it mattered now. He had to kind of switch his mindset temporarily away from grieving this horrible thing and think about his own life. Think about how he was going to make it down, because again, he wasn't that far off from death either. The Sherpas had to pull Robert, who was basically catatonic at this moment, away from Maria's body. They slowly guided him down the mountain, And unfortunately, they actually couldn't bring Maria's body down with them because it was just too late in the day. It would have been too much work, too dangerous. It took over a week for Maria's body to be recovered from the mountain. And folks, that's the week that my friend Tom Pollard from the Everest Mystery Channel actually saw several Sherpas working to bring down Maria's body during his own climb to the summit of Mount Everest. In fact, he actually summited Mount Everest just a few days after this tragedy struck. And Tom told me that when he saw the body of Maria and all the Sherpas around it, it wasn't the kind of thing that you would like stop and stare at, right? Tom saw the scene, acknowledged, to himself that it could actually happen to him too, potentially, and then he kept pushing forward, giving himself the best odds to make it up to the summit and back down in one piece. I've never seen a dead body before, and so I don't know how I would react if I was in this position. But I mean, if you're gonna do Everest, there's a pretty good chance you're gonna see one. There's still tons of bodies on Everest to this day that haven't been brought back down, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So I guess the best thing to do if you encounter this is to just try and not let it get to you, even if it's literally staring you in the face. Anyway, so as soon as Maria's body was brought down from the mountain, you can imagine that some intense debates flared up about what happened. Again, not very many people talk about this story, but there was a little bit of media coverage, particularly in Australia. And as you can probably imagine, the one thing that a lot of the coverage centered around was the veganism aspect, their diet. Could that have possibly contributed to what happened? So I actually asked Tom about his diet when he summited Everest. I mean, that was my first burning question after all of the vegan stuff that I was reading about, because you're not like packing sandwiches or making bacon at 26,000 feet. And so I wondered what people eat up there and if certain foods affect your body in different ways. Tom said that once you're up there in the death zone, particularly, at the very, very end of the climb, it doesn't really matter what you eat. He ate ramen noodles, for instance, just straight up carbs. And he said that basically anything you can get into your system at that altitude and also keep down at that altitude is a miracle, because you're just focused on climbing. Your body is struggling. You can't really think about food that much. The most important thing is to just get some calories in you and then get out of the death zone as quickly as possible. And as for Maria and Robert's strict, long-standing vegan diets before getting to Everest, well, Tom couldn't really speak to if that affected their climb or not. I mean, he's not a diet expert. And so we're kind of still left with that question. Did Maria's veganism contribute to her weakness at that altitude? Again, I'm not an expert on diet. I'm not even close. I literally ate McDonald's for dinner last night. But through my research, this is the best I could find. Extreme climbers usually need dense calories and high protein nutrition. And having extra reserves of iron and B12 going into something like Everest, it has to be helpful in some way, right? And we all know that getting all of those nutrients is simply more challenging for people on plant-based diets. Although I'm sure someone's gonna contradict that in the comments, and so feel free. If you know more about this than me, just do so respectfully, please. That's all I ask. But there's actually something else at play here, because while a lot of people in the media were arguing about veganism, some other quieter people were saying that HAPE, the respiratory issue that Maria was dealing with on the mountain, is something that kills people indiscriminately. Whether you're a meat eater, a vegan, an Olympic athlete, an experienced Everest guide, or a silly YouTuber, the mountain doesn't care about your diet or your principles. It only cares about physics, oxygen, and the human body's limits. So what was it? Well, folks, here is the cruel irony, the twist of fate that answers the question we've all been thinking about. And to my knowledge, no source out there has put these two pieces of information together, but my research has led me to this, so I want to try and get this exactly right. So Maria was aiming to be the very first vegan ever to summit Everest, right? And supposedly, Robert would end up taking that honor, or at least that's what I've told you. Well, Robert was actually the second vegan to ever summit Everest, because the first vegan to summit Everest was actually Kuntal Joyshur, an Indian mountaineer who reached the top of Everest the day before Maria attempted her own climb. literally. So the record, Maria died while chasing that incredible bar that she and Robert had set for themselves to achieve, to prove to the world that vegans could do anything, had already been done less than 24 hours before they had their chance to touch the summit. I mean, this is just crazy, right? And one has to wonder if knowing that information about the record already being broken would have affected Maria and Robert's decisions on the mountain, if they would have maybe come down before it was too late. It took years for Robert to come to peace with what happened to Maria. He still can't look at pictures of her, partly because of how heartbroken he is, and partly because he still can't quite believe how quickly everything just went wrong. But even though Robert may feel some guilt for what happened that day, you know, me personally, I don't really think that there was much he could have done to help. I mean, maybe the Sherpas could have gotten Maria down the mountain sooner, but that decision would have been going against her own desire to keep pushing, right? And plus, she was keeping her struggles pretty quiet up until the point where she basically couldn't breathe. And also, it's important to note that there was no guarantee that even if Robert had stayed with her or had descended with her instead of going to the summit, there's no guarantee that she still would have survived either. For Maria, I'm pretty sure that having her husband there with her at her last moments brought her at least some comfort and peace. Maybe even her knowing that Robert had successfully reached the summit himself brought her some peace as well. But it's still just so tragic, man. And to me, Maria and Robert's story and all the gaps that we've filled in with this video still doesn't answer maybe the most important question of all. And that's where I need your help. Would you climb Everest with the person you love the most, knowing that there's a 1 in 100 chance that one of you won't come back? Which again is a pretty small chance, but if you just so happen to be the 1 in 100, then obviously, do I even need to say it? The consequences are dire. I don't know. Please answer that question in the comments, and please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories like this, especially if you made it all the way to the end. Help us get to 1 million subscribers. That's our goal. I would really appreciate it. And also be sure to check out Tom's channel, Everest Mystery. Tom is a total badass. He's way more knowledgeable about Everest than I am. And so I will link his channel in the description. And this video would not have been possible without him. He helped us a lot with our research and stuff. And so show him some love in the comments as well. And of course, may Maria rest in peace. Show her some love as well. I always appreciate when you guys are just like so respectful to the victims that I cover in these stories. And so if you enjoyed this video, YouTube seems to think that you'll enjoy this one next. And so give it a click. And folks, I will see all of you in the next video. I appreciate all of you so much.